Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar on CIHT professional registration. So my name is Greg Saunders, and I'm the Education and Qualifications Officer here at CIHT. And I'm delighted to be joined today by Cameron Patterson, Principal Engineer at Jacobs, and Damian Meehan, a Technical Director at WSP. I'm also joined today by my colleague Kat Gumal, CIHT's Head of Education and Professional Development, and Kat will be helping me to collate and respond to questions during the webinar. Firstly, can I just say that it's fantastic to see such a high number of people in attendance today, and I hope that you'll find the next 60 to 90 minutes helpful in your own journey to becoming professionally registered, which we hope will be through CIHT. In terms of the running order for today, I will be providing a brief presentation on CIHT, describing what professional registration is and the benefits of becoming qualified. We'll then be playing a presentation from Cameron, who'll be giving his advice on how to be successful from a candidate's perspective. Then we'll have a presentation from Damian, who will cover what reviewers look for from candidates seeking to be successful at the professional review stage. We'll then conclude with a Q&A session, so please do enter any questions which you might have in the questions tab on your GoToWebinar toolbar. Both Kat and myself will respond to some of these questions during the webinar, whilst leaving others to be answered by the panelists at the end. What I would say is please do try and keep your questions as broad and as general as possible, as we may not be able to answer very specific questions on certain individual projects that you've worked on. So let's make a start. And I just wanted really to give you all a bit of information about who we are and what we do, because I'm aware that not everybody in attendance today is in fact a CIHT member. So we are a charity, learning society and professional membership body, and we are the leading voice of the highways and transportation infrastructure profession in the UK and globally. We were founded in 1930 and awarded a Royal Charter in 2009. We've got just over 14,000 members. We also have 12 CIHT regions and nations and several international groups in countries such as Hong Kong, Qatar, Malaysia and the Republic of Ireland. Each region and nation has a committee which is run by volunteers, and they help to provide the voice of the institution across and beyond the UK. And our regions and nations also help organise an annual programme of activities, which include CPD events, seminars and social events. We also have a partnership network which brings together different organisations, all of whom work within the sector. So that's private sector companies, public sector authorities and transport bodies, as well as research and education centres. We provide a platform for these organisations to come together to discuss and debate common industry challenges and to share experiences, best practices and lessons learnt. Essentially, we like to think of ourselves as being a natural home for everyone and everybody working within the highways and transport sector. So who are our members? As you can see here, we've got a very diverse range of membership. And essentially, we represent and qualify professionals who plan, design, build, manage, maintain, and operate transport and infrastructure systems. Our members come from the private, the public, and the academic sectors. So hopefully you can see that CIHT is an excellent place to not only learn more about your own work and profession, but understand how what you do fits into other areas of the sector as well. We've got 6 different membership grades to offer you support at every stage from student until you retire. Listed on your screen right now are some of the benefits of becoming a member. Obviously, it opens up opportunities to apply for professional qualifications, relevant low or no cost CPD opportunities, industry recognition of belonging to a professional engineering institution that will enable you to use post-nominals after your name, of course various opportunities to network, etc. Applying for CIHT membership is very straightforward. It's all completed online. It takes normally around 3 to 4 weeks to become elected as a CIHT member. As I said, all the information can be found online, but if you do have any questions at all, then please just get in touch with our membership team. Their email address is membership@ciht.org.uk. So that's membership for those of you who are not members. Obviously, we're here today to talk about professional registration. Now, I've got this quote which is taken from the Engineering Council's website directly. So I'll just read it out for everybody. Professional registration provides a benchmark that gives the public, employers, clients and colleagues confidence and trust that registered practitioners have been assessed and judged to have demonstrated competence and commitment in line with recognised professional standards. So a bit of a mouthful, but what that essentially means is that in your office, it's great that the people you work with think that you're doing an amazing job, but this is really something different, and this is an external assessment by people who don't really know anything about you other than what you've said in your application. But by looking at your application and by speaking with you, they're satisfied that you've met national recognised standards. So it really is a fantastic achievement, and it does add a hell of a lot to your career. And I will speak about some of the benefits of becoming qualified in a moment. Just to let you know that we are licensed by the Engineering Council to award the following 3 levels of professional registration: CEng, IEng and EngTech. Now, if you are thinking about applying for one of these titles at some point in the future, you should seek to familiarise yourself with the Engineering Council's document called UK Spec. It is worth noting that the standard is the same regardless of the institution you apply through. So essentially CEng is CEng. And there's around 35 different institutions in total who offer these qualifications. Now, although the standard is the same, it really is the context which is different. So if you're working within highways and transportation, probably the most appropriate option would be to apply through CIHT, as you can be sure that your assessors are highways and transportation professionals who really understand the context that you're working in. So there are a number of reasons why you might wish to consider becoming professionally registered. First of all, it shows your employers that you've got the knowledge and the skills required to meet the engineering and technical challenges of today. And this can obviously lead to career progressions both now and in the future. Becoming professionally registered means that you're likely to have a higher earning potential across your working life. It demonstrates your commitment to professional standards and to developing and enhancing your competence. Gaining professional registration can bring a sense of achievement and helps to boost your own self-esteem and confidence. Now, the UK Spec document, which I just referred to, is well respected across the world, so can present international employment opportunities. And becoming qualified, it helps to show employers, peers and the public that you've spent a number of years really developing your skills, knowledge and understanding within your field, and you've clearly demonstrated your competence and commitment by being successful at your professional review. And obviously, once you are qualified, you will then belong to a network of experts, and by being a member of CIHT, that really kind of gives you an opportunity to get involved in a whole range of influential activities, such as consultation responses, campaigns, etc. Now, UK Spec is designed to set out the competence and commitment standards for engineers working within any discipline, to help you as highways and transportation professionals relate what you do to the rather generic standards contained within UK Spec. We have contextualised 8 relevant specialisms so that no matter what area you're working in, you should be able to apply what you do to the generic standards within UK Spec. We've got a gap analysis exercise document, which is available to download from our website for both CEng and IEng, and this will really help you kind of focus what you do to the UK Spec standards. And choosing which specialism is also very important because it helps us to allocate you appropriate reviewers at your professional review, because at least one reviewer will share the specialism that you've declared in your application. Now, in order to become professionally registered, you must demonstrate your knowledge, experience and professional commitment to the appropriate level for which you're applying. The academic benchmarks for the engineering qualifications are set out on your screen. But generally speaking, it's an accredited master's degree for CEng, an accredited bachelor's degree for IEng, or a recognised level 3 qualification for EngTech. Now, the word accredited means that it will appear on the Engineering Council's accreditation database as having gone through some form of accreditation process. What I would like to stress at this point is that if you don't hold accredited qualifications, that doesn't preclude you from making an application. It's simply an indication of the level of knowledge which you will have to prove via an alternative means of assessment before you're eligible to move on to the later stages of the process. Now, this is a question we get asked a lot. How much experience do I need before I apply? Well, for CEng and IEng, we do normally say around 5 years of experience, and immediately this can sound like quite a lot, but when you think of all of the technical knowledge and experience that you need to gain, in addition to the management experience, 5 years probably is the quickest that you could do this and still feel confident that you could meet the standards. In all honesty, the average amount of experience tends to be around the 7 to 8 years mark. Again, it's not a rule, it's just an indication, and it does vary from person to person depending on the level of exposure they've had. Crucially, and I guess the most important point, is the experience must match the relevant standards as set out in UK Spec. So again, please do try and familiarise yourself with this document. Cameron will focus on this as well as Damian, but it's really important that you focus on your personal experience and get used to try to speak in first person, which I appreciate is not always easy to do. Finally, the professional commitment part of the process. So this really covers things like ethical conduct, understanding the wider social and environmental implications of your work, which obviously very much at the forefront at the moment, mitigating climate change. So in order to satisfy the standards and convince your reviewers that you understand your professional commitment, you will need to start having a view on these areas. Health and safety and risk management, also very important, as is your commitment to CPD. So please do start recording this if you haven't done so already. There is a CPD template which is downloadable from CIHT's website, which you're of course welcome to use. Commitment to equality, diversity and inclusion are also important and fall under the heading of professional commitment. Now, if you are interested in finding out more about the routes to becoming qualified at CEng, IEng or EngTech level, the first step would be to go onto our website and complete what's called an online initial assessment. It's free of charge and shouldn't take you any longer than 5 minutes to complete. You'll simply need to upload a copy of your CV as well as any relevant academic certificates. You don't need to be a member in order to complete an initial assessment, but you would need to subsequently become one if you wish to pursue an application for professional registration with CIHT. Now, the final slide, and the final thing I wanted to make you aware of is that the application process for all of our engineering qualifications has moved online. You can link to it from the main web page for whichever qualification you're applying for, but essentially the portal will help guide you through all of the evidence that you'll need to collate in order to prepare your portfolio of evidence submission. You can save it as you go along and come back at any time to add extra information, and you can view a draft copy of your submission again as many times as you wish before you're ready to formally apply. I've got a quick screenshot there of the dashboard, and there's instructions on each page to kind of direct you as to what needs to be completed for each section. So that's my section presentation over. If you did have any questions, obviously please do put them in the questions tab, or feel free to contact us separately at education@ciht.org.uk. Thank you very much for listening, and I will now play Cameron's presentation, which he's kindly provided us.
Hi, my name is Cameron Patterson and I'm a Principal Engineer working for Jacobs Engineering Group. Today, I'm going to talk to you about the professional review process from the perspective of the candidate. My own professional review journey started with my EngTech with ICE back in 2017. I then progressed on to do my IEng with CIHT before completing the technical report route and finally chartership. In addition to this, I've also been a reviewer with the CIHT since 2019. Through my own professional review journey and my experience as a reviewer, I've picked up various hints and tips in preparing for professional reviews and hopefully I can share some of those with you today as practical tips which you can take away and will be helpful going forward. So this slide provides a bit of an overview about what I'm going to talk about during this presentation, and for me I like to think of the professional review process as like a bit of a journey, and the first stage to any journey I suppose is to decide where are you going. So what are the different routes to professional qualification and what's right for me. The next part of that is checking that you have everything you need for the journey, and that's kind of what you do before you leave the house: keys, wallet, phone, etc. And to me, that's understanding when is the right time for you to sit your review. Are you ready? Once you've got over that part, you're on the road. So you're doing two distinct things. Firstly, you're preparing your portfolio of evidence, which is like the vehicle, I suppose, that's going to take you on this journey. And then finally, you're moving on to preparing for the review itself. So if your portfolio of evidence is like a vehicle, I suppose the preparation is like the fuel for getting there. And then finally, the destination, which is the review itself. Now, I suppose a lot of people think about this as the kind of most daunting part of the process, but actually, I kind of find that if you get everything else right on the run up to that, then actually the review should be relatively simple and is relatively short. And hopefully throughout this, I'll provide some useful tips which you can all use going forward. So in starting the journey for professional registration, the first thing to decide is what route am I going to take? And I suppose the first part of that is understanding what the current levels are. So these are engineering technician, incorporated engineer, and chartered engineer. And there are very good definitions of what these benchmarks are within the Engineering Council UK Spec. So for anyone who's unsure, I'd advise going to have a look at these. Speaking from kind of personal opinion, I suppose, and personal interpretation, to me, Eng Tech is someone who does what is required, whereas CEng is maybe more someone who develops what is required. And finally, to me, a chartered engineer is someone who leads on what is required and sets out that vision and that direction in what you're doing. Now, one of the first and most important things in deciding which route you want to go down is asking yourself, what is my current role and what are my kind of maybe future roles in the next 3, 4, 5 years, and what will they allow me to progress towards? So naturally, if you're in more of a technician sort of role, you might be tended to gravitate towards the engineering technician route. And the other side of that coin is qualifications. So find out what your existing qualifications actually allow you to progress with. Now, of course, there are alternative routes. So for myself, I didn't have a master's degree and did the technical report route prior to chartership. But find out what those existing qualifications are, and you can get that information from the Engineering Council's website, which has a list of accredited courses for the various grades. Another thing that's important to consider in selecting the right route for you is what it means in terms of career progression. I suppose for a lot of us, that is what we're looking to achieve with this, and you want to select the right level that's going to give you that career progression. Now, from personal experience, I know that I did my CEng, and then kind of immediately after that went on to a project role where the client was looking for a minimum of an incorporated engineer. Now, I know that had I not had my CEng, I probably wouldn't have got that role. So it was really important to have that. And getting that role and working in that position gave me some of the experience that I needed to progress towards chartership. So consider in the intermediate before you go for your chartership whether there's benefit in looking at Eng Tech or CEng options. And that probably brings me on to the next bullet point, which is recognising the benefits of the options. So speaking from experience, I've worked in 2 organisations, one of which tended to kind of encourage people more perhaps to do the incremental process going through Eng Tech and CEng, whereas one of the other organisations kind of tends more towards pushing everyone to focus on the CEng level. And I would say, and it's probably going to come on to the next bullet point, is a lot of it is around personal choice. It's your journey, but I would say that I did find that there was real benefit in doing the steps incrementally as I progressed throughout my career, and particularly in preparing for my chartership review. That experience that I had from doing the Eng Tech review was absolutely invaluable in understanding what was good in a presentation, what was bad, what worked well during the review, and what experience was good in the portfolio of evidence. It really was a big benefit. but ultimately that is going to come down to personal choice, and that is probably a kind of neat segue onto the final bullet point. And I would say with this that there is no right or wrong way to kind of undertake your professional journey, and everyone always has an opinion, I suppose, on what is the right way to do it. I would just say that it's important to listen to other people and to take those opinions on board, but ultimately this is your career and it's for you to take ownership of. So I'd really encourage to do what's right for you. If you feel that you're someone who needs that kind of experience up front before you go straight to chartership, then maybe consider whether it's worth doing your Eng Tech or doing your IEng. Similarly, if you're maybe kind of much more advanced in your career and you've been working in quite a senior position for a long time, it may be kind of not a valuable use of time to go through Eng Tech and IEng, and you may want to consider just going straight for the CEng route. So this slide focuses on how to know when you're ready to make the journey and when to start progressing with sitting your review. And with this one, I'm keen to keep it really simple, and I've split it down to essentially what I see to be the two component parts of deciding you're ready to sit your review. Now, the first one is to understand the standards, and I cannot stress how important it is to fully understand the standards. And by that, I don't mean have a kind of general grasp on what a chartered engineer is or what an incorporated engineer is, but really having a very thorough look through the UK Spec, which underpins the standards that the CIHT are reviewing you against, and looking at that and saying, what are these standards? What do they mean? And what does that look like in my area of discipline? And that's really important to stress upon, because the standards are quite broad because they're written for a range of disciplines and to cover all sorts of kind of aspects of engineering. So what is really useful is getting to grips with what that means within the area that you work within. And I'd encourage engaging like a mentor on that and talking to them about what they think good looks like. And similarly, maybe speaking to people within your organisation who've already completed that level that you're aspiring towards, and understanding what they used to demonstrate the competency to these standards. But without understanding the standards, you're never really going to know if you're at that level. And I would discourage people from kind of comparing against others and saying, oh, that person's chartered, like, and they've got so many years experience, because they may have been significantly overqualified. Their experience may not be the same as yours. So if you're competent in the standards, that's really what you have to understand. Now, the second part of it is understanding yourself. So you understand the standards, but really what you need to do is a thorough gap analysis on where you are in comparison to those standards, what things you have done which address the standards, and what aspects of the standards you haven't currently addressed. And the best way to do that is to sit down and think about your experience and do a gap analysis. Now, I found that there's loads of ways to do gap analysis. You can write development reports, you can start populating the competency sheets for the templates for the application itself. But I found that one of the easiest ways that I did it was basically to set up a spreadsheet with each of the competencies and their kind of subparts, so A, B, and C, and just put a couple of bullet points against each one as to how I would address that standard and what evidence I would be able to provide that did so. And ultimately, if you don't have anything, that empowers you to go and have those conversations with your employer and say, I'm going for my chartership, but I don't have any contracts experience and I feel like I need that. So can you get me any of that? Similarly, if you go through that exercise and there's no gaps, then you can probably kind of determine from that that you are ready to sit your professional review. And again, engage in mentors within that, speak to your managers, speak to the kind of leaders within your organisation, and really understand where they view you in front of that standard. And ultimately just keep it simple. These are really the two aspects that you need to be comfortable with before you go for your review. So you've done your gap analysis and you're ready to go on to sit your professional review. So that really falls into two kind of distinct areas, and that's preparing your portfolio of evidence and making sure, I suppose, for the journey you're in the best vehicle possible, and then preparing for the review and making sure your vehicle's fueled. So some tips in preparing your portfolio of evidence. So Damien will talk from the kind of perspective of a reviewer, so I'm not going to cover too much about what a kind of high standard of portfolio of evidence looks like. I'm going to focus more on some tips from a candidate's perspective, and how you can things you can take into preparing your own. Now, the first one I would say is engage a mentor, not a sponsor. Now that's maybe a bit flippant towards kind of sponsors, but the point I'm trying to make with that one is that anyone can be a sponsor and sign off a review form. But ultimately what you probably want in this process is someone to give you some guidance and to help you throughout. And that to me is a mentor, not someone just signing a sheet of paper. So identify people within your organisation who can really help you there. And I would say engage with maybe 2 to 3 mentors on it. It's good to have different opinions and different views. Similarly, I would probably discourage against engaging with maybe more than about 2 or 3 mentors. I personally found that the more people that I involved, the more kind of conflicting opinions that I got, and that can actually be quite confusing. So I would keep it to a kind of small circle. Now, the second tip I would give is to plan. So we all know that there are kind of key deadlines to meet when submitting your portfolio of evidence. So make sure that you have a kind of solid plan on how you're going to go about meeting those deadlines, and really think about that. And also plan with your mentors. So a lot of the time you're engaging with kind of, again, managers and leaders within your organisation who will have really busy schedules. So make it clear what your expectations of them are. You're wanting maybe them to review your portfolio twice and do a mock review, and here are the dates and here is the amount of time that will take, and that allows them to plan that into your schedule and to make sure everyone is aware up front of whether that is possible. And then you get no nasty surprises further down the line when people don't have time. The third tip I would give is put your best foot first, and that really is around making sure that the evidence which you include is the best that you have to offer. It can be very tempting to kind of wedge in experience that you think probably, oh, that's maybe the best thing to address the competency, but I don't feel that comfortable on it. And it's important to note that anything that you put in is fair game during the review process to be asked upon. So make sure that there's nothing in there that you think, I'm not too sure about it, but I've put it in because I think it's the best thing for addressing the competency. You are much better to put in the things that you feel best about. And I suppose adding on to that, it can be tempting to put in the kind of biggest projects or the most fancy kind of tasks which we're undertaking, but you are really trying to focus on yourself within this. So make sure that you're capturing where you gave the biggest contribution, where can you really sell yourself, and that can be something much more simple. But if your input was the best it can be, that's what you really want to be putting in. So make sure you're putting that, your best stuff, forward and into the portfolio. And the last tip I would give in preparing your portfolio of evidence is go back to basics, go back to the standards that I talked about in the previous slide, and really understand, is my portfolio addressing the standards? Now, the reviewer will be looking at your portfolio with a sheet of just a checklist of all the standards, and they'll be saying, this is this standard addressed, this is that one addressed. So you should do a similar exercise, go through your portfolio and say, right, did I answer that question? Is there something in there which I think links to that standard? Because that is exactly what the reviewer will be doing. And if the answer to that question is no, then perhaps you want to revisit that and look at, right, where can I put that in? Or can I put it into my presentation? Can I address it in another way? But you really need to make sure that you are addressing all of those standards and competencies in your portfolio. So moving on to that, you've got a brilliant portfolio. So I mean, again, going back to the journey analogy, you can have a Ferrari of a portfolio, but if you've got no petrol to put in it, then you won't be going anywhere anytime soon. So in preparing for the review, some tips. The first one is study. It seems obvious, but what you're going to be asked about is what's in that portfolio of evidence. So make sure that what is in there is stuff that you know absolutely inside out. So spend some time revisiting it, speak to people who were involved at the time, and make sure that you have such a good grasp on it. It's so important. And if there are things that you don't know about, then go and find out, speak to those who were involved. The next one is undertake mock reviews. Now this can be quite a polarising topic, the mock review. Some people think it might damage your confidence going into the review. I would say that I always took a lot away from mock reviews, and it's much better to have a little bit of a confidence knock in the run up to your review than to get to it on the day and for there to be a gap. And your mock review you always identify gaps, and it's much better to find them out now before while you still have the chance to rectify them. So I'd really encourage mock reviews, and they should feel difficult, they should feel hard, and they should be uncomfortable sometimes because you're finding the areas which you don't know as much about. And finally, mock questions, which is possibly a little bit of a more kind of unusual thing, but a technique that I've used in preparing for professional reviews is to actually run through my portfolio and think, what is it within this portfolio that I might get asked? And what I've done is just write down all of the questions and think, this is what a reviewer might ask me, and think, how would I answer that? And make sure I had answers for everything. And if I didn't, then go and find the answer out. And you might only capture 50% of what you're going to get asked. I mean, there's a lot of things that they could bring up. But that's 50% where you absolutely know back to front how you would address that issue. So I think mock questions are really beneficial, and it's something I've taken into mentoring other people as well. So you've arrived at the final part of the journey, so destination review, and what are the tips that you can take forward into the review itself from the perspective of a candidate. Now, the first one I think is really important and probably the most difficult one, but it's try and relax. I mean, it can seem like the kind of biggest, most important thing in the world, but it's just a professional review. And if you've done all of the steps before this properly and you've really prepared, then there's nothing to be worried about on the day. Your reviewers will make you feel very comfortable, and it should just feel like a kind of interesting conversation between three professional engineers. So just relax, make yourself feel better. I know from my own perspective, I found I was so nervous going into my first Eng Tech review that I raced through the presentation and didn't get out the things that I wanted to get out. And that just doesn't help. So do what you can to try and relax. The second bullet point is practice then present. And I think that's really important to make sure you've practiced your presentation and you can keep it within the time frame. So you have 15 minutes, and kind of immediately after the 15 minutes, your reviewer will stop you if you're running over time. And your presentation should have competencies kind of laced throughout it. So you might, on your final slide, you might be going to talk about health and safety. And if you don't manage to get to that, then that might be a hole in your experience, which is later kind of one of the reasons that you're unsuccessful. So make sure you have the time to say everything you want to say. And it's also worth picking up on the fact that if you kind of get stopped, you'll feel on the back foot, you might feel a little bit uneasy, and you don't want to go into the rest of your review like that. The third one is don't speculate on answers. And if you don't know, you don't know, and just say, I don't know. Now, obviously you want to maybe offer up some reasoning behind that. So don't just say, I don't know, and leave it at that. You might want to expand on, that's not my area of competence, or that is the responsibility of another member of the team. And there's nothing wrong with that. The reviewer is trying to find out what you did. So if you don't know, it's okay to say that. What you don't want to do is speculate, and then suddenly you're answering questions on something which really you don't know anything about, and you just come across like you're not understanding it. But the flip side of that is own what you do know. So one of the things that I found very challenging in my reviews that I tended to do was slip back into talking about we or the team, and the reviewer will often then push you for, well, what do you mean we? Like, was that your decision? Was that you who did that? And it can feel like maybe they're questioning you a bit on, like, you feel uneasy, like, oh, are they trying to catch me out? But they're not. They're just trying to understand, was that actually your decision? Did you take responsibility for that? And therefore, does that address the standard? So really take ownership of it. Refer to yourself. I did this. This was me. Which can be difficult and is probably quite unnatural to most of us. But for 75 minutes, it's probably best. And refer to the competencies. So in your answers, give really broad, whole answers on things. Expand on it as much as you can. You don't want to kind of talk for 20 seconds and leave it at that. And pull in the other competencies into that. So when you're talking about things like design decisions, then bring in the fact that you used an innovative technology, bring in the fact that you considered health and safety and sustainability and how you did so, because that demonstrates the whole spectrum. And it's so key, because just because you put something in against competency C or whatever it is, then That doesn't mean it can't address an aspect of competency A, and the reviewers are constantly looking for those crossovers. And then the last two are probably linked, but try and enjoy it. So again, relax, like try and find it. I find, probably speaking more from a reviewer perspective, that the best professional reviews are those which I've come out and said, that was a really good conversation, just really interesting between three engineers. It didn't feel like a test. So try and get to that, try and enjoy it. I'm not sure I could ever say that I did enjoy a professional review, but that's probably by the by. And finally, at the end of it, celebrate. So it's a really anxious way to find out if you've passed or not. But honestly, you've come this far, and that in itself is an achievement. So give yourself a pat on the back, have a beer, like sit down and just enjoy it however you can. And when the results come in, like if you've passed, brilliant, like congratulations, and celebrate that again. And if you've been unsuccessful, it will probably feel like a big hit to take. But just remember that you'll have learned loads from the process, and you'll be much better placed next time, that once you've addressed that reviewer feedback, you'll be ready to go in and sit your presentation again. So thank you very much for listening, and I'd invite any questions that you may have at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Cameron. And yeah, as Cameron said, if you do have any questions, please do put them into the questions tab on your GoToWebinar toolbar. But just for time purposes, we are going to swiftly move on now to Damian's presentation.
Hello, I'm Damian Meehan and I'm a Technical Director with WSP UK. I'm here to give you the reviewer's perspective, but before I do, a little about me. I became chartered through CIHT and I've been reviewing chartered, incorporated and technician candidates for the last 12 years. I've been involved directly and indirectly with over 100 professional reviews in that time, and I've learned a great deal, both from the candidates and also my co-reviewers. They each have their own style and approach, as individual as they are, but one thing is always true: the standard is applied consistently. The tips that I'm going to provide you with today are based on the stories of those reviews. Now, before I start, I must say that crossover with the other speakers is somewhat inevitable, but I will try as far as possible to limit that. If you're looking for further guidance, I can thoroughly recommend you take a look at Ross Spear's webinar from earlier in 2020, which is an excellent resource. The outline of the presentation looks something like this. First, I'm going to start with addressing some of the stories and myths that you may have come across whilst thinking about your review. We'll then move on to what I call the art of the impossible, which is your opportunity before the review to set up for what I'll call that ideal review. Now, we all understand that the ideal review doesn't exist, but you can take steps to get as far as possible toward it. We'll then move on to the art of what I call the possible, which is during the review and how you respond with confidence and conviction and plant the seeds within the reviewers' minds that you are at that level. We'll then talk about what follows in terms of how the reviewers come to their recommendation. I'll talk a little bit about how remote reviews are changing the landscape and some tips around those, because trust me, they are really quite different. The content is the same, but how you might approach them is different. And then we'll have a recap with some key messages for you to take away and think about. So before we talk about preparing your portfolio and the review itself, let me address some of the stories and myths that you may have heard in the course of your preparations for review. Thinking about the reviewer's task first, one of the first things that they will do is, on receipt of your portfolio, look and see and get an initial feel as to how you might meet the standard. They will look for strengths and weaknesses and then compare those with the thoughts of their co-reviewer and come up with an initial plan as to how they will address that within the review. They'll also make adjustments and try to put you at ease. Now, the adjustments could be for a variety of reasons. Perhaps on the day you're particularly nervous, so they'll allow you to settle into the review. Their job is quite simple. They're there to elicit the information from you so they can come to a balanced view, and it's your opportunity to give the best of yourself. They may enter into some small talk, ask you about your journey, about how work is going. It's all there to settle you into the review and allow again those nerves just to sort of filter away and then allow the real you to emerge. They're going to be listening to you and trying to seek understanding of what you're saying, always checking the veracity of what you say, of course, and comparing, but they want to learn about your experience and your thoughts. And that's really important because they need to understand so that they can get that full view of what you actually have done and how you feel about things. And in that respect, they'll help you marshal some of those thoughts and articulate that experience. Now, it's vitally important that you understand that this is your platform. And the first thing to really get across is that you know more about you than your reviewers do. You have the advantage, and it's a very, very important one because it places you in a unique position whereby if you can't articulate that, it's very difficult then for the reviewers to fully buy into it. So please use that advantage to its absolute maximum. I will say, from whatever you may have heard, there are no quotas to fill and no prior knowledge of your experience other than your portfolio. In advance of accepting the review, the reviewers are asked for conflict checks. So that is checked if we've perhaps worked with you or our businesses are the same. You may work in a large consultancy or for a large contractor. Those are checked in advance. So we don't have a great deal of prior knowledge other than what you've presented within your portfolio. And it's your opportunity to make the best use of your time. There is only 75 minutes approximately for a chartered and an incorporated review. It's 45 minutes on average for an engineering technician review. So there isn't a great deal of time with which to gather the information and make a recommendation. So you really have to hit the numbers and get your experience across in the best way possible. So moving on then to preparing for your review, preparing your portfolio, and what I'm calling the art of the impossible, which is a means with which to prepare your portfolio which gives you the best possible opportunity and gives you a position of strength from which to set from. Mentors and sponsors are vital in preparation for review. Sponsors you'll appreciate, of course, because they sign your application, but they have an important part to play because you should have hopefully chosen sponsors and mentors that are fully conversant with the standards of UK Spec and what you will face during review. It's important to test your views and responses with as many different people as possible. Again, they should understand the standard, but that comes from mentors and sponsors. Your reviewers will be registrants at the level to which you're applying, but they may not be from your specialism. And so they will maybe look towards other areas of the standard upon which to base their questions. And if you are using people in a particular way, or only a few, you could end up in the position whereby you focus solely on an area and miss the other areas that are so vital in terms of the reviewer's appreciation of your meeting the standard. So it is important to have divergent thinking. And so from that, you really do need to ask an awful lot of your sponsors. Don't simply rely on them to sign your form and to allow you to submit your portfolio. Use them. They are a fantastic resource. And if you don't have them, if you don't use them in a particular way, perhaps you should be thinking about seeking new sponsors. Thinking about the portfolio and how you submit it, it's vital that you frame it in such a way using me, myself and I. It's your experience that the reviewers are looking at. It's not about your teams. It's not about colleagues. It's about you and how you think and what you have done and what you've learned. Please don't put in too many appendices. Whilst appendices are important and can play a very important role in allowing the reviewers to understand your experience to date, they don't want to see reams of drawings and specifications that don't really have anything to do with you or can't be attributed to you. That really is wasting your opportunity, and it plants a bad seed. What you want to do is provide the reviewer with a very confident, well thought through portfolio that they can be confident that you really do already meet the standard, or at least you're a long way toward it. The next point is a very, very useful one, and it's one I tell everybody preparing for review. Within your portfolio, you should always strive to place hooks, as I'll call them, or propositions. These are a crafted means of explaining your experience where you're directing, leading the reviewers to make questions upon it. And you should, of course, always make those hooks around your particular strengths, or, if you're really confident, around some of your weaknesses, or at least failures, and what you learnt from those failures. You can guide the review by using these in a very careful, crafted manner, and the best portfolios are full of them. It's a skill, and it will be only one that you can fully appreciate by using your sponsors and your mentors, who will be hopefully able to see them and act upon them within mock interviews. Now, the final point is an important one, because if you leave anything out of the portfolio, it leaves a void in which the reviewers must resolve. So, for example, ethics is an important attribute, an important issue for professional registration. If you don't really touch on ethics in a fulsome manner, that will then open questions. That may be one of your hooks, an omission, but be careful, because if you haven't got it in there, it does leave that void for the reviewers to question, and they will have to do so. So you've prepared your portfolio, hooks are in place, what hopefully is the ideal review is now in place. but now it's the day of the review itself. And the planning that took place in the portfolio has now effectively been abandoned. But that's okay, that's expected, because nothing is ever quite as we might expect or hope for. But you can still make the review the very best you can and give that very best account of yourself. And this is what I'm calling the art of the possible. So the first step in this is to be your own best friend. When questions are put to you by the reviewers, give broad, holistic answers that cover the whole of UK Spec. For example, you may want to talk about a particular project, but bring into it themes of health and safety, sustainable development, ethics, a whole range of different themes that demonstrate thorough understanding and competence, and give a very positive impression to your reviewers that you really do understand what the moving parts are of a project and how each impacts your own practice. Use me, myself and I. We've discussed this previously, but it's so important because this is your review, not that of your colleagues and teams. It's all about you and your experience. So explain to the reviewers what you did, what you may not have done, or what you might do differently. Everything that seems to be useful to you is what the reviewers are looking for. Examples are so useful because they set perspective and set a context around your responses. Even better, failures are so very helpful because the hardest lessons are those from failure. The fastest lessons are from failure. This is a forum with which colleagues are discussing topics of interest. There are no black marks. It's useful and it really will demonstrate far more than you might imagine. What we want to see is that you've learned from those failures and how you would apply that failure in a different way the next time around. It's very important that you understand UK Spec and the differences between chartered engineer, incorporated engineer and engineering technician. For example, the chartered engineer standard calls for vision and how chartered engineers will be asked to produce strategy. That is really what the reviewers will be looking for within you and your responses. A little now about academics and how they might approach health and safety. Academics sometimes fall down on how they apply the knowledge of health and safety, and it's very important that they think about that because it's not somebody else's responsibility to manage health and safety. If you're looking at this as a reviewer, we're looking to see how that person meets the standard and what involvement and commitment they have to implementing effective health and safety management. Now, I have had many examples in the past where it's put over that they don't get involved with it. That's not going to really help matters. So what they can think about is how, for example, laboratory situations or site visits take place and what steps they take to manage health and safety. What you can expect in the review, as you perhaps already picked up, is a set of challenging questions. They're there to stretch your thinking, to test that thinking, to test the limits of your understanding. Many people don't necessarily appreciate that the standard is being assessed across the whole piece. And so if you are a specialist in, say, pavement engineering, you may have already demonstrated within portfolio your application to practice. And so the reviewers may not spend a great deal of time, given what we've just mentioned about only being 75 minutes in length, or even shorter if it's engineering technician. So they will focus their time and energy on the other areas of the spec that you don't necessarily demonstrate so well, or doesn't quite need, or needs more explanation. As a side note, you may be in a review that has trainee reviewers or observers sat alongside you. That will be explained from the outset, and if you agree, that will then take place. There will also be perhaps members of the panel that assesses reviewers' performance themselves. These people don't take any part of the review, but they will be there to assess either the reviewers or just to bring on new reviewers for their training. Okay, so moving on then to really what is an important piece of this, steering clear of the pitfalls. One thing that is absolutely essential is that you understand that if something is in a portfolio, it becomes fair game. And that's not just to the portfolio, actually, it's also in your responses. So if you embellish, or you're not completely sure or have strong conviction of an answer, it's quite reasonable for the reviewers to question and delve into that. And if you cannot stand up to that questioning, it places doubt in the reviewer's mind about how your experience really tallies. So please don't fall into the trap of trying to impress your reviewers by perhaps just going a step or two beyond what you're comfortable with or what you can evidence. It's absolutely essential. Qualification on its own is not enough, because the standard of a chartered engineer and incorporated engineer are broad. I have had examples where people are very, very highly qualified, doctorates in particular areas, but that alone does not qualify them for those registrations. They will be questioned, as we've already touched on, across the whole range. And so please don't feel that simply to turn up and have it rubber stamped on the basis of engineering knowledge and expertise is enough. It simply isn't. And that's where coming back to understanding the specification, UK spec, is so very important. Final one is, think about your CPD. It needs to be broad, and it needs to be equipping you with the tools and the attributes to move forward with your ambitions. It needs to be linked with your personal development plan. And that's why we want to see as reviewers that you are taking steps to do that and to move forward in a way that doesn't simply just reinforce your own specialism, that it stretches you and it develops you in the way that you want to become and you want to go in your future. You've answered the questions to the best of your ability. You've put any further clarification points over, and the review is now concluded. So what comes next? How do the reviewers come to their recommendation? Well, speaking as a reviewer with 12 years experience, it comes down for me to perhaps 3 points. First and foremost is, what impression do I get from a candidate? Are they confident? Did they answer with conviction? Did they basically do as what we've just mentioned in the previous slides? Did they provide opportunity to demonstrate broad, holistic thinking? Would I employ them? Is often a question asked between reviewers in coming to a conclusion about the candidate's performance in review. We want to be able to see the evidence easily accessible to us, and that's not just within the portfolio but also at the review itself. It needs to jump out at us, but if it's put in a way that we can associate with quickly, it makes it so much easier, because effectively what you want to be doing is treating us like a client or a customer. We want to help you, but you need to help us in return. And also, we also think about the key messages that you've put across to us. Where do your strengths lie? What would you improve on, and how do you feel you want to take things forward? Sort of key elements in how we come to a conclusion. And it is to some extent a gut feel, but it is based very much on that evidence piece. I've got here about an excellent review. Now, I'm not going to touch on that too much, because hopefully if you've done what I'm suggesting you do, and you take into account the tips from others such as Ross in his webinar, this will take care of itself anyway. But just to make you aware that at the end of the review, there is often opportunity for reviewers to nominate you for particular awards. That might be the Baroness Whittle Award, for example, but there are a number of awards. But if you've done everything right, again, that will take care of itself, just so you're aware that they do exist. Now, when the reviewers have completed the paperwork and come to an agreed recommendation, that recommendation goes forward to what is now known as the Engineering Professional Standards Panel. And the role of that panel is basically to assess the recommendations from the reviewers and make sure that it tallies with the paperwork that's prepared, so an audit trail is in place. You will get a letter that will set out whether you've been successful or unsuccessful and the reasons behind that. And their job is to independently assess whether that correctly and appropriately communicates that point or those points. They may go back to the reviewers to seek further information and clarification if something just doesn't feel quite right, or there is a gap. They also work with the standards panel to make sure that the reviewer's performance is up to scratch, and ultimately they will ratify those recommendations that you then receive within the official letter. A little bit about remote reviews then. Fundamentally they are the same, but they do have their nuances, and as you can pick up from this webinar, it's quite difficult to articulate certain emotions and certain themes without perhaps over exaggerating. And that is important because we do miss as reviewers certain cues, and you also will too from your side of the review. I would always suggest you invest in something like a headset, because the audio quality can be very poor, and if we can't hear you or you can't hear us, it makes the whole process very difficult. Tests are always made to make sure that the IT is as good as it can be, and although from time to time it will fail us, whether it's the broadband connection or whatever, that is an important step to consider. I've mentioned that communication can be quite difficult, it's quite two-dimensional, so make sure that you are trying your best to impart that feeling that you want to get across. One pet hate I have, and this I don't necessarily believe this is universal, but I have been in remote reviews where it's quite obvious that people are looking up the answers on Google. That tends to be around health and safety questions. Please don't do it. It's not professional and it's not really appropriate. You should Either accept that you simply don't know, but please don't fall into that trap. It leaves a really bad impression with the reviewers, certainly myself. So you've put into practice all of the good tips and advice that we've touched on. Now it's time for a recap. Firstly, it's your review, and you know more about you and the subject than anybody else, which is a huge advantage that you should put into its maximum effect. We've touched on me, myself and I, and for those that might remember the 80s and 90s hip-hop scene and the band De La Soul, please just bear that one in mind. For those unfamiliar, go on YouTube and check it out. I think you'll like it. Use hooks and propositions to lead and frame the conversation, both in your portfolio and also in review. Answer with conviction and breadth, but always keep on point, because the last thing that a reviewer wants to see is somebody going down an alley that doesn't really resemble the question or the subject. So always keep in mind the themes demonstrating breadth must still be relevant to the question at hand. Use successes and failures and the learning opportunities that came from them. They are so useful to demonstrate understanding and frame the conversation. I'm going to leave you with a quote from Thomas Edison, and basically saying that the chances of success are really rooted in planning that goes before it. So take that time to make sure that your plan is as good as it possibly can be.
Thank you very much, Damien, and thank you to everyone who's attended today. We obviously have got a little bit of time left now for some questions. So both myself and Kat will run through a couple. Kat, did you want to kick off with a question?
Yeah, first of all, I've got a few questions about sort of how you apply. So the first question, probably to you, Greg, is do you have to use the CIHT template to apply for professional review?
You would need to use our online application service, yes. In terms of CPD templates, you are welcome to use an alternative template as long as it clearly demonstrates the number of hours which each activity took and clearly reflects on what you learned from that individual activity.
That's great, thanks, Greg. And then sort of following on from that, actually, and perhaps to Damian and Cameron, what sort of things should you record in your CPD record?
Well, I think from my perspective, it's really about relevant CPD. It's very easy to kind of come up with a list of various things from within kind of all around the industry, but I think the reviewers are particularly looking to understand that you've been doing CPD that's relevant to your kind of role and what you do. And it's also good to try and where you can bring CPD into your portfolio and how you've used something that you've learned in CPD. So obviously you have the CPD record, but the reviewers are looking for a kind of more tangible evidence of how you've used that CPD. I don't know if you want to add anything to that as well, Damien.
I think the only thing I would add is, I think as I pointed out in my presentation, that I think for me, CPD should be equipping you with that next step as well. So if you have aspirations in a certain area, you need to perhaps be starting to plan your CPD to facilitate that. So for me, it's about what Cameron's just mentioned, but also then going beyond, perhaps beyond that. But that might be, that might be a reinforcement of your current specialism, but it needs to have, for me, that demonstrable link between the sort of present and the immediate future, really.
Thank you. Okay, another question here then. Is it better to use one project to demonstrate competence in the portfolio of evidence, or is it better to use several projects and jobs over your career?
I think Cameron obviously touched on it in his presentation, but for me, no no real limit on it, but it's about the depth. And if one project has that depth, then one project is enough. But if it doesn't, then you need to start thinking about other projects. But then ultimately, I think I'd sort of come back full circle and say to somebody that if you are struggling to find the depth in your examples and you're looking for multiple projects, then are you really looking at the right projects to start with? Or even, do you need to start thinking about how you're going to properly evidence that at review?
Yeah, I think just to add to that, I mean, something that I quite often advise people within Jacobs, because they've worked in projects for a long time, is that you can easily think of one large project as the same as a lot of small projects. So if you've worked on like an options assessment at DMRB stage 2, and then you then supervise that on site, I mean, they are almost essentially two kind of isolated projects. There's no difference if you then went and supervised another project on site. So as Damien says, it doesn't really matter. There's no right or wrong answer to that. It's about covering the depths of the competencies and the standards.
Thank you. There's been quite a lot of questions about sort of eligibility and things which we've either responded to individually or we will afterwards. But Greg, have you got some questions? I think I'm just going through.
Yeah, so a couple have come through. Maybe Damien can answer this one. In your opinion, Damien, the top 3 reasons as to why somebody might be unsuccessful at a review?
Top 3. First and foremost, probably health and safety is always the one that sort of always comes to the fore, and it's about that demonstration of the underpinning knowledge, which in fairness we don't have huge amounts of time to go into. So it's about understanding Health and Safety at Work Act, the regulations that sort of sit beneath those. But it goes beyond that. Of course, you've then got to be able to explain your experience and knowledge around how health and safety is managed in a certain setting. And I mentioned about academics sometimes struggling with that, but it's not that they necessarily would struggle. It's about how they understand how best to put that evidence forward. So health and safety is probably number 1. Number 2 would probably come down to perhaps for the CEng standard around that management piece and leadership vision, and how that's brought about and how they sort of answer the questions around that. Always seems to sort of come in quite high. And perhaps number 3 would be probably around perhaps just the conviction around sort of the more technical aspects, where people just don't seem almost reticent to expand upon the answer. They're quite closed, and there is the art there of the reviewer to bring that out. But I think the sort of technical issues can start to sort of fetter. But those for me would be my 3.
Thank you. And a quick question for Cameron, maybe. Would you recommend the kind of incremental approach in applying for IEng before CEng? Did you find that experience helped you prepare for CEng better?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I touched on it a little bit in my presentation. Like, I think it was twofold. I think that within my own career, it opened doors and opportunities that I probably wouldn't have been afforded without it. And then that in turn has the knock-on effect that you can then use that experience going into your CEng. But I think just the confidence of the professional review process as well, it really helped. I mean, you'll find yourself when you go into your professional reviews, and that's particularly why I recommend people doing mock reviews, that there's a way to answer the questions to kind of drive on the conversation, and you want to kind of answer in a very open way. And I think you get better at that. It's kind of like anything. I mean, with practice, you do get better. I mean, it is a very personal choice. And I would caveat it by saying that a lot of people think that potentially it'll take a lot more time. I think it's a different decision if you've not got the experience to go for CEng yet. then I would say go for your CIHT. Why not? I mean, you might as well do something in the meantime. If you've already got your experience for CEng, it's then more of a case of how confident do you feel going for your review. So I think for people with a lot of experience, I would tend to think if you feel comfortable, just go straight for the CEng.
Thank you. Any others, Kat, looking at the time?
I think that's probably all we've got time for, because I know we need to some of our speakers need to get away. But if we haven't got round to your question, we've got a record of all the questions, and we'll try and make sure we contact you afterwards. Or if you think of any other questions, do contact us at education@ciht.org.uk.
Thank you very much, everybody. I hope you found that helpful. Thank
Thanks,
you,
everybody.
Damian.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Greg.
Cameron.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.
Thank you.